of the greatest challenges we face on this planet is to get through the whole experience of it with a smile on your face. Life seems difficult, the world seems difficult, so much happens in the world that affects us badly and makes us feel fear and anxiety. As an astrologer, I deal with it a lot. People talk about what's going to happen and is this going to happen, and I'm afraid of what's going to happen. People arrive at my office here and say, you know, is this year going to be better than last year? That was the worst year I ever had. The world is in a terrible state. What's going to happen to the country? All of these things make people feel really stressed and unhappy. And all of those things are things way outside of ourselves, making the whole process of doing anything about it really hard. And it did get me to thinking a lot about happiness and what brings us happiness. You know, lately I've been reading the philosophy of the Stoics, which I'll talk about more in the show On and Off next year, but also today we'll be looking at some Stoic ideas about happiness. And also got me to thinking about an interesting book that I recently read about happiness by the wonderful magician Darren Brown. I'll talk about that in a few minutes' time, but what was really one of those serendipitous coincidences is that last Monday, the New York Times published a great big article about how do we find happiness and what do the experts agree on what makes us feel happy. And I was particularly interested in that because many things are related to classical ideas, philosophical ideas, Stoic ideas about what makes us feel happy, or how do we create happiness in our lives. But I thought I'd share a couple of those because they're also quite important. One of the most important that's listed on that is learning to conquer your negative thinking by being kind to yourself, by showing yourself that things aren't as bad as you like. And a great exercise in that is when bad stuff happens to you, ask yourself, how would you view it and how would you respond if it actually happened to someone else? It's very powerful because it stops you being in the drama of what happened and gets you into that mode of how would you fix that drama for someone else? How would you give them some perspective? That's one great thing to do. You find a lot of classical things on the list, like spending time in nature, doing more exercise, spending time with pets. Cats and dogs are a great lift from that, and it's been proven time and again that people who spend more time with animals and people who are on their own or older who've got animals live longer and happier. So it's a great and simple solution. Spend time with your pets. Spend time with happy people. That one's also on the list and makes a difference to ourselves. And declutter. Getting rid of clutter around ourselves makes us feel good. A good exercise, famous one in the declutter, is the 1-minute rule. And that is, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the clutter in your room or the clutter on your desk, or in fact by anything else, find something that'll take only 1 minute to do and do it. Like hang that piece of clothing, or answer that brief email, or just pack away that little pile of books on the corner there. Just one a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, whatever works for you. Don't stress yourself out, but that positive, I'm conquering the space around me, makes a big difference. A really good one is when spending money, spend it on something which gives you more time, because time is the thing we always feel we don't have enough of. And that's a really interesting thought. What kind of things give you more time? Well, they're often a little bit more expensive. Order in tonight, don't cook, and that's going to save you like an hour and a half. But spend your money on things that give you time, not product, and you'll actually find that you have a much better quality of life. Interesting one to try on that one. And then, of course, the ones that directly deal with our sense of humanity, being generous, volunteering. You know, actually, scientific studies have shown that people who volunteer actually get huge health benefits out of it. Voluntary work makes people generally have lower blood pressure and decreased mortality. Seriously, they took a group of one people, a group of other people. One group was volunteers. They evened the group out according to age and mortality likelihoods and so on, similar groups so that they've got the same likelihood of dying. And, you know, a quarter less died in the voluntary group over the volunteer group over a long period of time. So volunteering makes us feel more proactive and more positive about life. And, of course, giving yourself a break. Don't be so hard on yourself. Well, all of those, some extracts from the New York Times, can work. But I think it's more interesting if we look at a deeper philosophy and see how might that work for us? How might that be a more long-term, life-changing process? So what all of that got me to thinking about was a book by the magician Darren Brown. By magician, of course, I mean conjurer, entertainer magician Darren Brown. Many of you will know him from his many TV specials that are truly mind-boggling. And what his interest is as a magician is the mind and how the mind is easily manipulated. And like many thinkers before him, he realized that that's the best path to changing our experience of our everyday lives. It's all in the mind, because the mind is all about how we see things and react to things. And the ancient philosophers believed that it's very much in our thinking that the secret to happiness lies. Darren Brown, in his book, Happy, is especially interested in the Stoic philosophers. Like many modern people, he's discovered that the ancient Greek and Roman philosophy of Stoicism really suits the modern world and the modern mind quite well. It's often said that Buddhism is a form of spirituality that suits the Western mind because it tends to be rational and not so much faith-based as rational thought-based. And like I said, you know, thinking about things and being rational about things and how to find ourselves as human beings and how to be happy as human beings was seen to be a solution that could be rationally solved by the Stoic philosophers. Like I was saying, while it's often Buddhism that is said to suit the Western mind, it turns out that there are traditions in the past of our Western culture that also really suit the rational approach that we have long taken, at least since the time of the ancient Greeks in the few hundred years BC, taken that rational approach to understanding ourselves and understanding our problems. So the Stoics applied that to happiness, and Darren Brown has applied his thinking to that. And I want to give you a couple of the takeaways from Darren Brown's book about happiness, because I think he really manages to sum up many of the Stoic ideas very well and give you some food for thought. Just kind of 5 key takeaways from Darren Brown. I do suggest that you read the book yourself. The first thing he says, which is often contrary to what other people say when talking about happiness, is get rid of positive thinking. Positive thinking, he says, tends actually to be stressful, and it's largely a kind of a dangerous belief in magic. Darren Brown is a magician, and like performing magicians, he insists that really magic is, of course, an art of deception and an art of entertainment. It isn't something real. And so he jumps on positive thinking to say that people who relentlessly think positively, and he gives the example of that rather ridiculous book and philosophy, The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, where you believe that you can manifest everything and by thinking it so makes it so. That type of thinking is a stressful kind of thinking, because basically you put the responsibility for everything that happens onto yourself. Life experience shows that we might be responsible for our own actions and our own reactions, but we're not responsible for everything else that's happening around us. As much as we'd like to imagine that we're in control of absolutely everything with our minds, we actually aren't. But Byrne's philosophy of The Secret, which is again, frankly, quite absurd, rests in the idea that it's our thinking that really determines a lot of the experience we have around us. We manifest things. If you really want a fantastic car, you can manifest it. You've got to think in a way that makes you deserve it and attract that money to yourself and attract that car to yourself. And of course, that's magical thinking. What happens when it doesn't work? You've only got yourself to blame. What happens when you get sick? You've only got yourself to blame. Basically, it is a stressful responsibility, it is potentially a dangerous philosophy, and of course, it doesn't have much basis in reality because it's contrary to just about everyone's experience of the world. Occasionally it would work, naturally, occasionally everything works. Occasionally you throw a double six with the dice, it's going to happen. But for the most part, it is completely contrary to how we experience our life on earth, and of course, it is not the secret of the ancients, as that secret philosophy believes. It was never believed by any ancient people whatsoever, because of course it's frankly ridiculous. Brown says, following the ideas of the Stoic philosophers, you can choose the attitude you take to events. You might not be able to control an event itself. Stuff happens and you can't control for that. Other people do stuff. Stuff happens in the world. You can't control all of that. You see terrible things on the news and on your social media and all of that, and you can't control for that. Positive thinking ain't going to help. But what you can control for is how you respond to that. You can separate yourself and realize that the thing which is bad is the thing that happened. My reaction I can still control. So I could either cry and feel depressed, or I could find another way to understand it and perhaps take a more either rational or measured or larger perspective, whatever might be appropriate. I can control my reaction and therefore control some of the experience of that as a bad experience. So it's like the issue that something is and the drama that something is really comes from our interpretation of it, our judgment of it. It isn't the thing itself, because the thing itself is outside of us and outside of our control. So our experience is inside our control, and that is when our interpretation and judgment of something as terrible and dramatic makes it very much worse so. Sure, we're not supposed to fool ourselves. So we don't fake that everything is okay when it isn't. But we take a more measured, rational kind of approach. So you can remind yourself of previous times when such bad things happened, and when the world didn't fall down, or look at other points that you were ignoring about it, that you might not notice about it. Remind yourself of a bigger picture of some kind, and remind yourself of the past, and remind yourself that you don't really know what's going to happen. A lot of our hysteria and drama is based on what if, and fear and anxiety about what might happen. So remind yourself, rationally, you don't actually know what's going to happen. So take the more measured approach and say, while I don't know, I can react to what I do know. And all of that, which takes practice, it's not magic, it takes practice to do that. Sometimes you'll find yourself reacting, but you can start with the small stuff. I went hiking on the weekend with some people, and we were going to meet up at some meeting point, and basically I went in the wrong direction at some point, and then eventually, thank goodness for GPS, I could find their little pin on the map and start heading towards them. And there was a point when I was walking on the contour paths and realizing, starting to get into that childish panic of, I'm not going to make it in time to meet up with them, and it's their fault, and they should have actually told me the right spot. But I started getting into that childish panic mode, and then I realized I can control my reaction. And instead of panicking or feeling angry or feeling delayed, none of which is going to help me. And that's the point of the Stoics. None of those emotions actually help in the situation. I could choose my reaction and say, listen, it's going to take me this amount of time to walk up the mountain. I may as well just be calm and enjoy myself, and at least I won't get breathless by panicking at the same time. And I still got there, and I was fine when I met them, and you know, if I'd been in an emotional state, that would have actually put a bit of a dampener onto the whole hike, and it just wasn't necessary. And there's so many things like that. It takes practice, but it works. Take the drama out. The second thing is Control your desires and appreciate what you have. The thing about desires, as the ancient wisdom teaches us, is that desires are never satisfied. They're only temporarily satisfied. So whatever you want, getting it inevitably makes you want more or the next thing or better. I mean, why do we keep upgrading our phones? Why do we want the next phone? A great thing to do, a suggestion from Darren Brown, is to look at the things you already have. Remember when you wanted them. Ask yourself, where do you stand with respect to those things now? Do you even ever use them? Do you use all those extra features on that expensive upgrade? Do you use that exercise bike or something that's more fun than an exercise bike that you still might have thought you wanted and you're not really using, and you don't really use, and you're just acquiring more stuff and acquiring more desire and more belief that by acquiring what you desire, you're somehow going to be satisfied. And the truth is, you're going to be dissatisfied. That's where unhappiness comes from, wanting stuff. A very important third principle is surrendering the need to control other people and situations. And actually, if you surrender the need to control other people, essentially you will live a life free of stress, free of worry, free of concern for things which are really not in your control. Only your own thoughts and your own actions are in your control. Nothing else is, not even that of your children. And especially learning to let go of what is not in your control is profoundly liberating. It really gets you off the hook for a whole bunch of stuff that is causing stress and unhappiness. Darren Brown says, knowing the difference between what you can't control, which is almost everything, and what you can control, your thoughts and actions, is one of the most liberating realizations that you can have as a human being. That is true, and it's a very powerful statement. It takes discipline, it takes practice. Our instinct wants to control because control makes us feel secure. But letting go of control is the most liberating thing, because if you're honest with yourself, you don't have control. So stop trying to hold on to what you don't have. It causes stress, anxiety, and unhappiness. A very important source of unhappiness is anger. And you might think, oh, anger doesn't come up very often, but anger comes up more often than it ever used to because of social media. We see something on social media, it's usually fake, but even still, makes us angry, we get into reaction, often get into a fight. Not only social media, I mean, so many things make us angry and irritate us. On the road, so much of that stuff happens. So we really can't avoid feeling that anger, but we can change our response and our reaction to those feelings. We can moderate our response in some way, down to basic things. If you see a post you don't like, or you get an email or something happens, the most basic way to moderate anger is to wait. If you wait until the emotion has calmed down, it will completely change your response. Wait at least 2 hours before you reply to that email or you respond to that post. Actually, my email program's got a little delay button that you can activate, that when you press send, it actually waits 2 hours before it sends and gives you the chance to get into the draft folder and dig it out. And you can start with something like that to save your life and teach you the lesson. Because when you do that, there are so many times when you think, thank goodness for my delay button. There's so many times you'd think that by now I should know that delay button saves my life every week, at least once a week. But it is gradually teaching me to be comfortable with not responding immediately, because I know how often that delay button has worked for me. So try it, practice it. Don't respond to what you see on Facebook today. Respond to it tomorrow. And see how different your response will be, and see how different your day and your life will be, because you won't get into needless arguments about nonsense a lot of the time, but even when it's not nonsense. So when it comes to other people, and that can be on social media or in person, remember, you're not perfect either. So whatever is making you angry about them, look at yourself and say, what little things about me are just as bad? And it's not really fair to get angry about it. I mean, you can even take it from the other person's perspective. Try and see something from their perspective. But at the very least, remember yourself and remember, I'm not perfect. I get angry too. Something really important to do is to manage your expectations. Life doesn't always go according to plan. So if we're rational and realistic about it, we realize that unexpected stuff happens all the time, and the only thing that I can control is my reaction to that. So getting angry when things don't go as planned is irrational in the extreme, because it's a prime example of responding to something you're not in control of, changing your own emotional state to a negative one, and in the end, achieving nothing. In fact, if you manage your expectations and take a more realistic approach, not only will you not experience all that happiness, you'll experience a lot more success, because success comes out of the reality of the situation, not what you imagine that it is. Finally, the last key point that Darren Brown talks about, and which is important in the management of happiness in so many different philosophies, and that is to redefine your story. It doesn't mean lying to yourself, about what's happened to you, but what it relates to is the fact that our picture of ourselves and what we project into the world and how we've experienced particular things is really a narrative that we tell ourselves. So particularly our unhappiness about our past and our happiness about our lives is based on the interpretation of the story we tell ourselves about our lives. And we react to the different things that have happened to us, and that's our interpretation of the story of our own lives. So the first thing to do is notice how much of that story is defined by people or world outside of yourself. How much interpretation comes from outside of yourself. There's something that you're embarrassed about, or there's an experience that was really negative, or that you're embarrassed about, or that other people reacted badly to. How much of your story is defined by what they thought about it and how they reacted, be they society or individual people or your family. Redefine your story so you can find ways to reinterpret misfortune in a constructive way. Not positive thinking. Literally ask yourself, what was the lesson I learned? How did I change some things after that? Or how do I now realize I could change things after that? So even if the past seems to be, oh, well, it's too late to do something about it, you can still say, what did I learn about that? So, or how can I change my reaction? That bad illness that I had, that got me flat on my back, that I was so miserable about, and I always say I missed that opportunity because I was ill that year. That's a story you could change. And you could look back at that time in your life and you say, actually, during that time that I lay on my back, I thought about a lot of stuff, I processed a lot of stuff. I realize now that by interpreting it as blocking me, actually lying on my back got me to look at the obstacles I throw in front of myself. That suddenly makes you think about that block very differently. You've just owned it and you've just said, I'm responsible for my reactions. So finding different ways to turn your narrative into something that's enriching and empowering. Even if you just take a difficult experience or a bad experience you've had and write down everything from that, everything that you learnt from that, everything that changed in your life after that, you might be quite surprised. But most important, look at the stuff that's really that you blame things on, and that those parts of your narrative that seem to have affected you so adversely, those are the things to redefine and change. It's not a lie. You are changing how you respond to that, not what the event actually was, just like we can do in our everyday lives. Happiness is not dependent on our circumstances. Happiness is not dependent on success or fame or fortune. Happiness depends on how we choose to see our lives and how we choose to see our world. It comes from learning to control our thoughts and our actions, which are the only two things we can control. Nothing else. And when you learn that Only your own thoughts and actions and reactions are in your control, and nothing else is. You are liberated as a human being. You can put your energy into working on actions and reactions, and you will actually begin to change your life with discipline and practice, but with great inspiration. Because, like Brown said, it is liberating to actually start seeing things from the correct point of view. Go into that book, check it out, and begin to think about how you can create the happiness for yourself. Lots to think about, and lots that can really change your life. So hopefully lots of life-changing ideas are going to come up in the new year as we look in more and more of those philosophies, and of course in the weeks ahead. I'll be back next Friday as usual. Stay tuned on the Facebook page to see what's coming up, and I'll join you here next week on Cape Town TV, 7:30, YouTube at noon as usual. See you then.